Every morning she left biscuits on the porch until the day someone finally knocked back. Twice Martha's hands knew the rhythm before her mind woke each morning. Flour, salt, lard, buttermilk. The same dance her mother taught her 40 years ago, back when the world held promises instead of graves. She worked the dough in the pre-dawn darkness of her kitchen, feeling the familiar give and push beneath her palms. Outside, the desert stretched endless and empty, painted silver by a moon that had watched too many sorrows to care about one more. Her fingers moved without thought, shaping perfect rounds that would feed no one she loved. The cast iron pan heated slow and patient on the wood stove. Martha had learned patience the hard way. 3 winters alone in this cabin had taught her that time moved different when you had nowhere to go and no one coming home. She slid 6 biscuits into the oven, same as always. 2 for her breakfast, though she rarely felt hunger anymore. For the plate she would set on the porch steps, because some habits run deeper than reason. The first time she'd done it, right after they buried Thomas, it was just leftover food going to waste. No sense throwing good biscuits to the wind when someone might need them. That someone never came, but Martha kept leaving the plate anyway. It became a prayer of sorts, though she'd stopped believing God listened to women like her. Women who let their husbands ride out alone. Women who should have begged him to stay. The sun crept over the mountains like it was ashamed to start another day. Martha pulled the biscuits from the oven, golden brown and perfect. She split 2 open, watched the steam rise like tiny ghosts, and ate them with honey Thomas had collected from the hives behind the house. The bees were long gone now, moved on to sweeter places, but the jars still held their last gift. She wrapped the remaining 4 biscuits in a clean cloth and carried them to the front door. The morning air bit her skin, sharp and clean. Her bare feet found a familiar groove worn into the wooden steps, a path made by 3 years of the same hopeless ritual. The plate sat on the bottom step, chipped blue ceramic that had belonged to her grandmother. Martha arranged the biscuits with care, as if someone was watching, as if it mattered how they looked when they would only grow cold and hard under the desert sun. "There you go," she whispered to no one. The words got lost in the wind before they could find ears to hear them. Back inside, Martha went through the motions of living. She swept floors that never got dirty, mended clothes that rarely wore out, and read the same 3 books Thomas had bought her for their 10th anniversary. The pages knew her fingers better than any living thing did now. By noon, the heat made the cabin shimmer like a mirage. Martha checked the garden, picking tomatoes and beans that grew stubborn and strong despite her broken attention. The desert tried to kill everything soft, but some things refused to die easy. She avoided looking at the porch until evening. That was part of the ritual, too. The waiting, the not knowing, the small death of hope that came with finding the plate untouched. But when she finally stepped outside to collect the day's offering, her heart stumbled like a horse with a stone in its shoe. The plate sat empty. Martha stared at the bare ceramic, her mind trying to make sense of what her eyes were telling her. She picked up the plate with shaking hands, turning it over as if the biscuits might be hiding underneath. The cloth lay folded neat and tidy beside where the plate had been, not blown away by wind or scattered by some animal. Someone had been here. Someone had taken her food and left everything else just so. Fear crawled up her spine like a cold finger. In 3 years, nothing had disturbed her morning offering except the occasional coyote or scavenger bird, and they left messes behind. This was different. This was human. Thomas had always said the desert drew strange men, desperate men running from law or conscience or both. Men who might take more than biscuits if they knew a woman lived here alone. She should bar the door, load the shotgun, maybe even ride to town for help. But something held her feet planted on the porch steps, something she couldn't name. The cloth had been folded so careful, like whoever took the food understood the gift for what it was. Like they'd been grateful. Martha carried the empty plate inside and set it on the kitchen table. She stared at it until full dark fell outside her windows, trying to decide if what she felt was fear or something else entirely. Something she'd forgotten how to recognize. That night, she lay in bed listening to every sound the desert made. Coyote songs, Owl calls, the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Normal sounds that felt strange now, like they might be hiding something else. Someone else. She must have dozed because she woke to silence, so complete it felt heavy on her chest. No wind, no creatures stirring. Just the kind of quiet that meant something was different about the world. Martha slipped from bed and crept to the window, her nightgown pale in the darkness. The moon had set, leaving only stars to light the empty land around her cabin. Nothing moved in the silver-touched landscape. Nothing that she could see, but someone had been here. Someone had taken what she offered and left without a word, gentle as morning itself. She spent the rest of the night sitting at her kitchen table, watching the empty plate and trying to remember what it felt like to have purpose, to matter to someone, even if that someone was just a hungry stranger passing through. When dawn came again, Martha's hands moved through the familiar ritual. Flour, salt, lard, buttermilk. But this time felt different, charged with possibility she hadn't felt in 3 long years. This time, she was cooking for someone who might come back, someone who knew the value of a simple gift and the grace to accept it without taking more than was offered. As she shaped the dough into perfect rounds, Martha found herself wondering who they were, this careful stranger, where they'd come from, where they were going, and why they'd chosen to trust her small kindness instead of moving on hungry. The biscuits went into the oven, and Martha began the day's long wait to see if yesterday's miracle had been real or just the desert playing tricks on a lonely woman's heart. For 3 days, the plate came back empty. Each morning, Martha set out her 4 biscuits with hands that trembled just a little less than the day before. Each evening, she found nothing but clean ceramic and that careful fold of cloth. No footprints in the dust, no sign of how or when her mysterious visitor came and went. On the 4th morning, she saw him. Martha was hanging wash on the line behind the cabin when movement caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just heat shimmer rising from the desert floor. Then the shimmer took shape, and she realized it was a man walking toward her home. He moved like someone carrying a great weight, each step slow and measured. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been bigger, and his hat brim cast shadows so deep she couldn't make out his face. But something about the careful way he approached, stopping every few yards to look around, told her this was the one who'd been taking her biscuits. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about running inside, barring the door, reaching for Thomas's old rifle. But her feet stayed planted in the dusty yard, a wet sheet clutched in her hands like armor made of cotton. The man stopped at the edge of her property, maybe 50 yards from where she stood. Close enough that she could see the sun had burned his skin dark as leather, far enough that she couldn't tell if his intentions were kind or cruel. "Ma'am," he called, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Don't mean to frighten you." Martha found her voice somewhere deep in her chest. "Then maybe you ought to state your business." He nodded, as if that was a fair question. "Been taking your biscuits. Wanted to thank you proper." The honesty of it surprised her. In her experience, men who lived rough didn't often concern themselves with proper thanks. "You're welcome to them," she said, not moving closer but not backing away either. "Name's Samuel," he said. "Samuel Creek. Been traveling for some time now." "Martha," she replied, though she didn't offer her last name. Some things a woman kept to herself, even in acts of kindness. Samuel shifted his weight, and Martha noticed the way he favored his left side, like something there pained him, wondering if he might have work need doing. "I'm handy with repairs, can chop wood, tend animals if you got them." "What makes you think I need help?" He gestured toward the cabin with a careful hand. "Roof's got loose shingles. Gates hanging crooked. Garden fence could use mending." He paused. Just figured a person kind enough to feed strangers might be too generous to ask for help when she needs it. The observation stung because it was true. Martha had been letting things slide since Thomas died, telling herself she didn't have the strength for repairs when really she didn't have the heart. But hearing this stranger notice her neglect made shame burn in her cheeks. "I don't have money to pay you," she said. "Wasn't looking for money. Just," he seemed to struggle for words, "just like to earn what I eat, if that sits right with you." Martha studied his face, what she could see of it beneath the hat brim. There was something broken in the set of his shoulders, something that spoke of a man trying to find his way back to decent after losing his path. She recognized it because she saw the same thing in her mirror every morning. "There's a lean-to behind the house," she said finally. "Used to shelter tools, but it's got walls and a roof. You can sleep there if you want." Samuel nodded once. "Much obliged." He worked that first day like a man trying to outrun demons. Martha watched from her kitchen window as he climbed onto her roof, replacing loose shingles with movements that spoke of years doing such work. He didn't speak except to ask where she kept tools, didn't stop except to drink water from the well. At noon, she brought him a plate of beans and cornbread. He accepted it with quiet thanks, but ate alone in the shade of the house, not trying to make conversation. Martha respected that. Some silences were comfortable, others necessary. This felt like the latter. By evening, he'd fixed the roof, straightened the gate, and started work on the garden fence. When Martha set his 4 biscuits on the porch steps, he approached from the front for the first time. "These are mighty good," he said, taking the plate with hands that bore fresh cuts from the day's work. "My mother's recipe," Martha replied. She said the secret was not overworking the dough. Samuel nodded as if this was important knowledge. "My mother made fine biscuits, too. Been a long time since I tasted any that reminded me of hers." Something in his voice made Martha look at him closer. Beneath the road dust and sun damage, she could see he'd once been a handsome man. The kind who might have had a family, a home, a life that didn't involve sleeping in tool sheds and working for biscuits. "Where'd you come from, Samuel Creek?" she asked. His hands stilled on the plate. "East of here. Been traveling west for near 2 years now." Running from something? He met her eyes for the first time, and Martha saw pain there so deep it made her own grief look shallow. Running towards something, maybe, haven't figured out what yet. That night, Martha lay in bed, listening to sounds from the lean-to. Samuel moved careful and quiet, like a man used to not disturbing others. But once, near midnight, she heard something that might have been weeping, soft as wind through empty rooms. The next morning brought more work and more silence. Samuel mended her chicken coop, though she had no chickens. Fixed the pump handle that had been sticking for months. Cleaned the chimney with the thoroughness of someone who understood that small kindnesses deserved careful attention in return. On the 3rd day, while he worked on replacing a section of porch railing, Martha finally asked the question that had been building inside her. "You ever kill a man, Samuel?" His hand stopped moving on the wood. For a long moment, the only sound was whined through the sage brush that grew around her cabin. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "I have. Recently." "Recent enough." Martha nodded, surprised by how little this frightened her. Maybe it should have, but something in the careful way Samuel handled her things, the gentle way he spoke, told her he wasn't a man who killed easy or often. "Was it needful?" she asked. Samuel looked up at her then, his eyes holding a sadness so complete it seemed to swallow light. "Thought it was at the time. Now I'm not so sure. That's the thing about killing, I reckon. You can convince yourself it's right in the moment, but the wondering comes after. Is that why you're traveling?" "The wondering. Part of it." He went back to his work, his hands steady despite the weight of confession. "Man I killed, he had family, people who loved him, even if he was a sorry excuse for human flesh. Figure I owe them something for taking that away." Martha felt understanding settle in her chest like a heavy stone. "You're looking for them." "Been looking. Haven't found them yet, but I will." Samuel's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd made peace with a hard truth. "When I do, I'll have to answer for what I'd done." The afternoon stretched long between them after that, filled with the sound of Samuel's hammer and the whisper of Martha's thoughts. She found herself wondering what kind of man voluntarily walked toward his own reckoning, and whether such a man deserved the peace he was clearly seeking. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and shadow, Martha realized that somewhere in the space of 3 days, her careful routine had expanded to include another person. Someone who needed her kindness and understood its value. Someone who might disappear tomorrow, leaving her alone again with nothing but empty plates and memories. But tonight, At least, she wouldn't eat supper by herself, and someone would sleep under her roof who knew the weight of sorrow and the long road back for breaking. The question was whether either of them was ready for what came next when the past finally caught up with the present. They came on the seventh day, riding hard from the east with dust clouds trailing behind them like the smoke of judgment. Martha was gathering eggs from the henhouse Samuel had repaired when she spotted the riders on the horizon. 3 men on horseback, moving with the kind of purpose that made her stomach turn cold. She dropped the basket, eggs breaking against the hard ground, and ran toward the lean-to where Samuel was sorting through her late husband's tools. "Samuel," she called, her voice tight with fear. "Riders coming. 3 of them." He straightened slowly, a hammer still in his hand, and looked toward the approaching dust cloud. Something changed in his face when he saw them, a kind of settling that spoke of a man who'd been expecting this moment for a long time. "I know," he said quietly. "Been watching them for the last hour." "You know them?" Samuel set the hammer down with careful precision, like it was made of something precious and breakable. "The one in front, yes, ma'am. That's Jacob Morrison, brother to the man I killed." Martha felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "How long have you known they were coming?" "Saw their campfire last night, maybe 5 miles out. Figured they'd reach us by morning, but they took their time. Probably wanted to be sure I was here before they made their move." The riders were close enough now that Martha could make out details. The man in front sat tall in his saddle, his face set hard as stone. The 2 with him looked younger, maybe his sons, with the same sharp jaw and pale eyes that seemed to cut through the morning heat. "You could run," Martha said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew Samuel wouldn't. A man who'd spent 2 years looking for his victim's family wasn't the running kind. "No, ma'am. Running time's over." Samuel walked to the cabin and retrieved his gun belt from where he'd hung it on a peg by the door. Martha noticed his hands didn't shake as he buckled it around his waist, though she could see the weight of what was coming in the set of his shoulders. "Martha," he said, turning to face her, "want you to go inside. Lock the door and stay away from the windows." "This is my home," she said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I won't hide in my own home." Samuel looked like he might argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he nodded once. "Then stay behind me. Whatever happens, stay behind me." The riders pulled up at the edge of Martha's property, their horses dancing and snorting from the hard ride. Jacob Morrison dismounted with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle, his boots hitting the ground with the sound of finality. "Samuel Creek," he called, his voice carrying across the yard like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Been looking for you." "I know," Samuel replied, stepping off the porch and walking toward them with steady steps. "Was looking for you too." Jacob's hand rested on the butt of his gun, but he didn't draw. "Not yet. You killed my brother." "I did." The simple admission seemed to catch Jacob off guard. Men on the run usually offered explanations, excuses, denials. Samuel offered only truth. "In Tombstone," Jacob continued. "Shot him down in the street like a dog." "Your brother drew first," Samuel said. "But that don't change the fact that he's dead, and I'm the one who killed him." One of the younger men, probably Jacob's son, shifted in his saddle. "Pa, we gonna talk? Are we gonna finish this?" Jacob held up a hand for silence, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "My brother was a lot of things, Creek. Most of them not good. But he was blood. My blood. And you took him from this world. He was fixing to shoot an unarmed woman," Samuel said. "Your brother pulled iron on a saloon girl who wouldn't go upstairs with him. She couldn't have been more than 16. That's her side of it. That's the only side that matters. I saw what I saw, did what I did. Been carrying the weight of it ever since." Martha watched the exchange with her heart hammering against her ribs. She could see Samuel's hand hanging loose by his gun, ready but not eager. Could see Jacob Morrison struggling with something that might have been doubt. "You've been running for 2 years, Jacob said. "Haven't been running. Been looking. Looking for you and yours, trying to figure out how to make it right." "Make it right?" The younger man's voice cracked with anger. "You want to make it right? You can die, same as Uncle Pete did." "Billy, shut your mouth," Jacob snapped, but his son was beyond listening. "No, pa. We rode all this way to put him in the ground, not to stand here talking about making things right. Uncle Pete's dead. This bastard needs to pay. Billy Morrison's hand dropped to his gun, and Martha saw Samuel's body tense like a coiled spring. Time seemed to stretch thin as wire, each second heavy with the promise of violence. "Don't," Samuel said, his voice carrying a warning that made the horses shy. "Boy, you don't want to do this." But Billy was young and angry and full of the kind of righteousness that gets men killed. His gun cleared leather with the speed of youth, and Martha heard herself scream as Samuel's Colt appeared in his hand like magic. The shots came so close together, they sounded like one voice speaking twice. Billy Morrison's bullet took a piece of bark off the cottonwood behind Samuel's head. Samuel's bullet took Billy Morrison out of his saddle and laid him in the dust, still and small and suddenly looking very young. The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jacob Morrison stood frozen, staring at his son's body with eyes that held all the grief in the world. The third rider, the other son, had his gun halfway out of its holster but seemed unable to finish the draw. "Jesus," Jacob whispered. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph." Samuel kept his gun trained on the remaining man, but his face had gone pale as death. "I'm sorry," he said, and Martha could hear the breaking in his voice. "I'm sorry, Morrison. I didn't want this." Jacob looked up from his dead boy, and Martha saw something terrible in his expression. Not rage, which would have been easier to bear, but understanding. The awful comprehension of a man who'd just watched his son make the same mistake his brother had made 2 years ago. "He was fast," Jacob said, his voice hollow as an empty church. "Billy was always fast." "Not fast enough," Samuel replied. "None of us ever are." The other son finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Pa, we gonna finish this or not?" Jacob looked at him, then at Samuel, then at the body of his boy bleeding into Martha's dust. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years and the bitter taste of wisdom that comes too late. "No, son. I reckon we're finished." He walked to Billy's body, knelt beside it, and closed the boy's staring eyes with gentle fingers. When he stood, he seemed to have aged a decade in the space of a breath. "You got a shovel, Creek?" "Yes, sir." "Then I'd be obliged if you'd help me bury my boy. Don't seem right to haul him home over a saddle in this heat." Samuel lowered his gun and nodded. "Be honored to help." As the two men walked toward the tool shed, Martha felt something shift in the desert air around them. Not resolution, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of it. The understanding that some debts could only be paid in blood, and some blood only led to more bleeding. The question now was whether the cycle could end here, in her dusty yard, or if it would keep spinning on into another generation of grief and guns and boys who thought being fast was the same thing as being right. They dug the grave in silence while the desert sun climbed toward its cruel peak. Samuel and Jacob Morrison worked side by side, their shovels biting into earth that had seen too much dying, each man lost in thoughts too heavy for words. Martha watched from her porch, a pitcher of water and clean rags waiting for when they finished. The remaining Morrison son, who'd given his name as David, sat his horse at the edge of her property, staring at nothing with eyes that held the hollow look of someone trying to understand how the world had changed so fast. Billy Morrison's body lay wrapped in one of Martha's good sheets, the white cotton already showing dark stains in the heat. She'd offered it without being asked, the same way she'd offered the water and the shade of her cottonwood for the digging. Some kindnesses came from training, others from heart. This felt like both. When the hole was deep enough, Samuel and Jacob lowered the boy into the ground with the careful gentleness of fathers, though only one of them had earned that title. Samuel's face had gone gray with sweat and something deeper, something that looked like a man trying to carry more weight than his soul was built for. Jacob spoke words over his son's grave, simple words about a boy who'd loved horses and hated arithmetic, who could ride better than men twice his age, and who died trying to be something he wasn't ready to be. When he finished, David dismounted and added a handful of desert flowers he'd gathered while they worked. He picked flowers for our ma every spring, David said quietly, even after she passed. Still went to her grave come April with whatever was blooming. Samuel cleared his throat, the sound rough as sandpaper in the still air. If you'd like to say something more, take all the time you need. I'll be up at the house when you're ready to talk. Jacob looked up from the fresh grave, his eyes red with dust and grief. We'll talk now, Creek. Boy's at rest. Nothing more we can do for him here. They walked to Martha's porch like men carrying invisible burdens. She brought water for washing and coffee for drinking, setting cups on the small table Thomas had built for her morning ritual. The same table where she'd stared at empty plates and wondered if anyone would ever share her simple offerings again. I keep thinking about what you said, Jacob began, his voice quiet as prayer. About Pete drawing on that girl. About you doing what you thought was right. Samuel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, like it was an anchor in rough seas. Doesn't change what happened. Doesn't bring your brother back, or your boy. No, but it changes what it means. Jacob stared into his cup, watching steam rise like tiny ghosts. Pete was my little brother, you understand? I raised him after our folks died. Always felt responsible for the man he became, and the man he became wasn't good. David shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with honesty that cut so close to bone. Ah, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Jacob's voice carried the authority of a man who'd made up his mind about hard things. Pete hurt people, hurt women, hurt anyone smaller or weaker than him. I knew it, and I let it happen because blood's supposed to mean something. But maybe blood don't matter as much as doing right. Martha found herself speaking, though she hadn't planned to. When my husband died, I thought the world was ending. Thought nothing would ever matter again. But then I started leaving biscuits on that porch, and somewhere along the way, it became the only thing that did matter. The only way I knew how to keep being human. The men looked at her with surprise, as if they'd forgotten she was there. She'd been so quiet through their whole terrible morning that her voice seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. What I'm saying is, she continued, sometimes we do things that don't make sense to anybody else, but they make sense to us. They keep us from disappearing entirely. Samuel's eyes met hers across the table. You think that's what I was doing? In Tombstone, I think you saw something wrong, and you try to make it right. Maybe it wasn't the only way, but it was the way that felt true to you in that moment. And maybe that has to be enough. Jacob drained his coffee and set the cup down with the finality of a man closing a book. Creek, I came here to kill you. Rode 200 miles with my boys, planning to put you in the ground and call it justice. Now one of my sons is dead, and the other's looking at me like I'm a stranger. I'm sorry about Billy, Samuel said. Sorrier than you'll ever know. Boy made his choice. Same choice Pete made in that saloon. Same choice that gets young men killed every day out here. The choice to reach for iron instead of using what God gave them above their shoulders. Jacob stood, his movements slow and careful. David and I, we'll be heading home come morning. Got a ranch to run and a grave to tend. But before we go, I want to say something. He looked directly at Samuel, his weathered face serious as scripture. My brother's dead because he couldn't keep his hands off things that didn't belong to him. My son's dead because he thought killing would make him a man. Neither one of those things is your fault, no matter how heavy you want to carry them. Samuel's hands tightened on his cup until Martha thought it might break. Then what am I supposed to do with all this weight I've been hauling around? Set it down, Jacob said simply. Set it down and do something useful with the life you got left. That evening, after the Morrisons had ridden away into the desert twilight, Martha and Samuel sat on her porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. They'd been quiet for a long time, each lost in thoughts too big for words. You staying? Martha asked finally. Samuel was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice held something she hadn't heard before. Something that might have been hope. If you'll have me. Got no place else to go, and this feels as close to home as anywhere I've been. Martha smiled, the expression feeling strange on her face after so many months of sorrow. Tomorrow's Sunday. I usually make extra biscuits on Sunday. That's so. Thomas always liked a big breakfast after church. Course, We haven't been to church in some time, but habits are hard to break. Samuel nodded, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. Maybe it's time to start some new habits. The next morning, Martha made 8 biscuits instead of 6. 2 for her, 2 for Samuel, and 4 for the plate she still set on the porch steps. Not because she expected strangers anymore, but because some rituals were worth keeping. When Samuel knocked on her door, twice, soft and respectful, she smiled and called for him to come in. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and coffee, and sunlight streamed through windows that looked out on a world where broken things could sometimes be mended. They ate breakfast together at her small table, sharing comfortable silence and the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting the past, but from choosing to build something new from whatever pieces remain. Outside, the desert stretched endless and beautiful, full of possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine just a week before. And on the porch steps, for Biscuits waited in the morning sun, an offering to hope itself, wrapped in clean cloth and blessed by the simple faith that tomorrow might be different than yesterday. The sound of home, Martha realized, wasn't silence at all. It was the gentle morning conversation between 2 people who'd found each other in the vast loneliness of the world and decided that was miracle enough for any lifetime.